Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee and this week I want to talk about raiding games. So this week's video is inspired almost entirely by the last issue of Wargames Soldiers and Strategy, which was all about raiding games. Now, raids certainly make for very exciting encounters, and when you read personal histories, it's those sort of high risk, high reward actions that really leap off the page. All of which got me thinking about the Long Range Desert Group Raid on Barce, which I recreated as a demo game at Broadside back in 2017. And I replayed that game here in the operations room as a solo game a couple of years ago, and it struck me at the time how difficult it is to get the balance right when you're wargaming a raid. So this week I wanted to discuss my thoughts on the challenges and rewards of those type of games and ask, can a war game ever truly recreate the outcome of such asymmetric encounters? So before I discuss my Barce Raid game, I think it's best to start with the challenges of playing raids. Now, this month's Wargame Soldiers and Strategy magazine summed it up perfectly in the editorial when Guy said that raiding is probably one of the oldest military tactics and that raids can be hard to defend against. I'd go further and say that while it seems all the advantage lies with the raider, so does most of the risk. But what works in the real world or on the paper of a history book can be notoriously difficult to replicate in a game. Both sides need to have a reasonable chance of victory, whatever that looks like. Otherwise, someone is going to have a very disappointing and boring game. But I think it's also important that there is the possibility for the historical outcome to be replicated. If that isn't a potential outcome, then you're not really refighting that historical scenario. You're playing a fictional encounter, which is, fine in its own right. But if you want to recreate a particular historical encounter, you need to allow the options for that to actually come out on the table. This may sound like semantics, but I think it's important to replicate the dynamism of the encounter that first drew you in and made you want to play it on the tabletop. So rewind back 6 years. Why did I pick the Long Range Desert Group's Raid on Barce or Barce as the theme of my first ever demo game? Well, initially I just started collecting and painting the Long Range Desert Group because I loved the miniatures from GHQ, 6mm of course. And then I learned about the raid itself and was just swept away by the sheer audacity of it. And lastly, I found a truly excellent source book, Barce Raid by Brendan and Carol, that got my blood pumping and convinced me this story had to appear on my games table. But of course that was the easy part. Turning such an audacious raid into a workable game was never going to be easy. Some of the challenges that I found would be typical in many raid type games, including the disparity in force sizes. The Long Range Desert Group was numbered a few dozen men and vehicles versus literally hundreds of Italians. The element of surprise, replicating the confusion and lack of coordination on the Italian side, is an essential element to this particular story. Audacity. Some of the decisions made by the Long Range Desert Group look absolutely bonkers in the cold light of day. Driving through the occupied town of Barce on their route to the airfield, for instance, sounds absolutely mad, but somehow it worked. And then there's the pursuit. The raid was a huge success, but having kicked the hornet's nest, the Long Range Desert Group had a really tough time escaping unscathed. So going back to the pages of WSS, one of the articles simply describes all raids as having three essential elements: the approach, the raid and the retreat. Raiders need a realistic chance of actually reaching their objective, while the defender needs to have a chance to thwart the attack. Getting the balance right is really difficult, and as a games designer or an umpire, getting the balance wrong can turn an exciting game into a debacle. What I learned from my raid game was that whatever rules you use, the attacker should always start the game with key advantages. The raid is the epitome of surprise, and the attacker should initially face very little opposition. In my game, I gave the players the ability to, the raid players, the ability to pick the time and location of their operation by including the approach as part of their game. This put important decisions in their hands and helped them feel that the plan was their own devising and not mine. Meanwhile, the defender starts the game with huge disadvantages, the most obvious being are that they are unaware that there's an imminent attack or even which direction it's coming from. And this does mean that the defender has very little to do initially, except experience the uncertainty and frustration of waiting for an attack. This usually means the command and control of the defender will be severely limited. They may also have fewer troops to mobilise immediately, and they may have to wait for reinforcements to arrive. Now, this disparity should give the raider the chance to reach their objective, in full or in part according to their plan. However, once the raid commences, the imbalance should begin to equalise and then swing in the defender's favour. That not only gives the defender a chance to sort of claw back victory, back from the surprise of the actual attack, but also presents the raider with really important tactical decisions to make. The main one being, when is it time to withdraw your forces and call it a day? In my game, the Italians had lots of troops to call on, but not straight away. A small number of troops were inside the airfield and in the town itself, and would be released and available to the Italian player quite quickly, but they were very small in number and poorly armed. But other troops came into play from off table and at different times during the game. Some of the timing was entirely random, reflecting the scrambling of troops to react, but some could be delayed by the actions of the long-range desert group. So for instance, if the allied player had taken time to cut the telegraph wires, this could delay arrival from reserves from wherever those telegraph wires were going to. So there was different directions that the wires spread off, and if they cut certain wires, it could actually delay reserves coming from them. This handed tactical decisions to the raiding player and gave lots of headaches to the Axis player. But as the game developed, more and more Italian units began to appear on the scene and come under the direct control of the Italian player. This then handed tactical decisions to the Italian player. Launch a counter-attack immediately, but piecemeal, and launch piecemeal attacks on the raider to try and thwart their objectives, or wait and build up superior numbers to destroy the raiders entirely. All of these moments of decision had the potential to replicate the real events of September 1942, but also allowed for alternative outcomes and gave players on both sides important and real consequential tactical decisions to make. I'll put links to the game and other stuff that I wrote in the description below, and somewhere up here, I think, or maybe up there, I'll put a link to the Quick Strike battle report I did when I refought the game in this room a few years ago. So time to turn the question around and ask, have you ever put together a scenario for a raiding game? What was the game, and how did you tackle the various elements to achieve the perfect raid? Was it a scenario you wrote yourself, or did you use a commercial example from a rulebook or a supplement, for instance? And finally, did it work? Was it fun, and would you do it again? As always, I'd love to hear your stories of daring do and high octane action in the comments below. So time for a very quick hobby update. So I've spent much of the week writing rather than gaming. The last few weeks I felt like I've been running a little bit behind all the time, and this week I was determined to get cracking on future talking point scripts ahead of to get ahead of myself and give myself a bit more time. It has helped that I have had a couple of interesting topics to explore, and when the muse strikes, scripts can be really quick to write. Indeed, this was a brief talking point in our group's weekly paint and chat session this week. Honorary Reject, Jonathan Freitag, asked how long videos take to put together. And the answer, of course, isn't as simple as it sounds. As I said, writing the script can be a really quick process in the right circumstances. Now, I often begin writing outlines for future scripts as ideas pop into my head, sometimes weeks in advance. So I may already have a partially formed idea before I actually sit down and do the writing. So with the script done, filming the video is usually the easy part. That is, of course, if the neighbour's dog can stop barking, or the neighbour himself can stop hitting things with a hammer, or the local police helicopter isn't circling over our house for some unknown reason. I typically film my videos in one take, editing out all the fluff lines and retakes afterwards. The editing stage itself is the bit that actually can take the most time. My laptop is definitely getting a bit geriatric, and often seems to be working against me by running really slow just when I need to do something. However, my lovely wife is buying me a shiny new and hopefully faster replacement for Christmas, so I should be able to bring editing time down from 3 or 4 hours to 1 or 2 at the most, hopefully. So talking of editing, a couple of months ago I changed how I constructed and composed my Sunday videos. They now have what I describe as a magazine format, with sections of both the week's talking point and hobby and workbench reviews and things like that. I've even started introducing the occasional book review, and time permitting, I have a few ideas for other short sections that can be included now and again. But the big question is, do my subscribers like these changes? Now, when I made those changes, I promised to review the audience reaction, and a few weeks ago I did just that and posted a poll in the community tab of the channel. Now, initial feedback has been surprisingly clear cut, with over 80% saying they either like or love the new changes. Now, I'll keep the poll open for a bit longer, so if you haven't already taken part, please give it a go and let me know how you feel. Now, one of the other things I've been doing this week, and one of the reasons I'm trying to get ahead with some of my scripts, is because I've been trying to start preparing for the Analogue Hobbies Painting Challenge. Now, regular viewers or readers of my blog indeed will know that I've been taking part in this annual event for many years. And the purpose of the Painting Challenge is to get stuff painted, simple as that, and to use a bit of gentle group peer pressure to keep us motivated and productive during the winter months. Now, I'm a big fan of collective painting as a way of getting you to get paint on models, and over the years I've produced whole armies, sometimes 2 at a time, in the 13 weeks of the competition. And this year I'm taking it a little bit easier, focusing on mopping up models and units that were earmarked for earlier challenges but never got started. So this year I'll be painting civilians for my 15mm French Foreign Legion stuff, which I did a couple of challenges ago, and I'll be doing more medieval buildings for the Wars of the Roses projects I did last year. I also have some 6mm Celts and some Anglo-Zulu stuff and more terrain projects in the pipeline. Many of these models were primed and just waiting for attention, but when the challenge finally ended, we put down our brushes and then I just moved on and did other things. So, you know, they were primed and sitting there and they still haven't been done. So this year, for me, it's all about consolidating and painting neglected models. So that leads nicely onto a workbench update. Now, I've been painting more 6mm buildings, and this time I'm working on some of the models sent to me by Phil Page, aka 6mm Phil of Slug Industries, the ones that he sent me for review. They'll fit nicely into my medieval Wars of the Roses project, so I've started painting a couple of the buildings from the set. Now, the details on these models are really surprisingly easy to paint. I'm using a combination of contrast paints on some parts of the models and my regular acrylics elsewhere. My chosen colour scheme is a little bit different to how Phil painted his display examples. He's probably being a little bit more realistic. I mean, there are examples of half-timbered buildings all over Europe, and it's typical now to see pristine black, white plaster and black beams, especially in England, where this style was firmly established in the 19th century. In the late medieval, early Tudor period, it's likely that the wood beams would have been largely unpainted and turned a dark silver grey colour over time. The plaster infill would have reflected the colour of the materials available in the local area, but off-white and yellow would have been typical, even pink in some places. My choice of colour palette is sort of a compromise between the two, so I've largely gone with white and off-white plaster, with the beams painted a sort of black-brown but highlighted with a bit of dark grey, so sort of a blend of the realistic and the mock Tudor that we see now. I posted a few pictures of the finished models that I've done in the community tab on the channel earlier in the week, and as I complete others I'll put them on the community channel as well, just to show you how nice those models are. Well, that's it for this week, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling.